My name's Caroline Poynton, and once again I'm recording this again today. I'm not copyrighting and paying attention, because I'm correct about King Charles has changed his religion. Yep.
If we have to choose between the King and Christ, we're going to choose Christ. We've been told in the last couple of days that the King is going to protect the space for faith within the multi-faith nation. It's a new definition of his official role.
Yeah.
Buckingham Palace has just unveiled a significant revision of the King's official role with a newly released Sovereign Grant Report, describing His Majesty as a protector of faith across Britain's diverse religious landscape. You always know there's going to be trouble when they bring in the word diversity. It's the new religion. What appears to be an adjustment of his coronation oaths, if he has the authority to do such a thing, is in fact a betrayal of his office and of his Christian faith and of his subjects. To be a follower of Christ means to acknowledge him as the unique presence of God, bearing in his own body the salvation of the world. In every stage of human history, kings, emperors, and others have claimed this for themselves. The early church was forged in the white heat of the competition between the hubristic ambition of rulers and the recognition that Jesus was the way, the truth, and the life, exclusively. The moments in Christian history when this crystallizes are among the most poignant and powerful. One example is the martyrdom of Polycarp in AD 160. The latest Roman emperor had claimed to be God. All his subjects had to worship him by burning a grain of incense in recognition of his claims. They contradicted those of Christ. A centurion tried to persuade Polycarp simply to offer a few grains of incense to the emperor, telling him it was not his job. He had not become a Roman centurion to kill old men. But Polycarp refused, recognizing the significance of the act and its incompatibility with his witness and devotion to Jesus. They burnt him alive. The history of Christian martyrdoms is filled with Polycarps. The early Christians were sent to the lions because they refused to compromise on their allegiance to Jesus as uniquely God amongst us, God from God, light from light. Our own culture has brought two assaults against the authority of Jesus and the revelation of the Gospels in the last few centuries. The first is to deny there is a God at all. There are no gods of any kind. The second is to suggest there are many gods, and they are all equal. You can adopt any one or any combination of them you like. The first is an absolute disposition, the second a relativist one. Both are equally dangerous and inimical to Christ, to what he taught, and to those who follow him. The 20th century was particularly aggressive dogmatically in its refusal to recognize the existence of any metaphysical reality beyond what can be measured. This was always politically convenient, replacing transcendent authority with the power of the state, or with whatever dominant, pragmatic, philosophical agency happened to hold power. At the end of the 20th century, the spiritual and metaphysical needs of humanity to make sense of the world, to feed its spiritual hunger, broke through the surface of the concrete of empirical atheism, but did so in a new climate of relativism. There was no absolute standard by which the truth could be negotiated, it was thought. And so, as so often, the unique claims of Jesus were downgraded to be just one way, one spirituality, one religion amongst many. This, of course, is not just a position, it is a repudiation of the primacy of God, replacing him with a different God, us, humanity itself, our judgment, our preferences. It is a form of solipsistic idolatry in which humanity becomes the arbiter of truth and reality. We make ourselves God. We replace our Creator and his claims with our own centrality and our own self-sufficiency. But this is not only a challenge to common sense, since it's clear we did not make ourselves. We cannot claim to be the Creator. It's an act of rebellion. It's in direct contrast to the claims of the living God, who made himself known through the prophets and the law of Israel, and finally in the incarnation of Christ. So there are questions of allegiance and authority in terms of what Charles has done. When King Charles takes upon himself the authority to confront the claims of Christ and to reverse the hierarchy of the divine by replacing Christian philosophy and spirituality with the relativism of multi-faith, this is not just an act of dilution, it's an act of active rebellion. It needs to be seen for what it is, the repudiation of the claims of Christ. But beyond that, it needs to be seen as an inept and politically and philosophically unrealistic in its assessment of the claims of different religions. For Islam does not accept this relativization of reality, and it uses the ineptness of Western liberalism to advance its own absolutist claims. This has been politically very successful. In the context of Great Britain today, political preference has been given to the rights of the immigrant, and particularly the rights of Islam. You can, for example, have an Islamic prayer meeting that blocks the entrance to Downing Street and constitutes a show of political and religious power, and the police will not interfere.
No.
But if you read the gospel in the street, offending same-sex attracted couples, or you stand praying silently within a designated area near an abortion clinic, the police will arrest you. In other words, the King's new stance on religion, claiming religions to be indistinguishable from one another and equal to one another, fails not only the demands of his office, it fails even to offer the basic protection of free speech and the primacy of conscience for Christians. It does not even afford Christian protection in the body politic. If all religions are the same and all equally deserving of protection, it ought to follow that Christian witness, Christian ethics, and Christian allegiance should be protected by the law as any other, and we know they are not. So this is an act of betrayal by the king. In making himself the mouthpiece of an alternative religious philosophy, Charles III not only betrays his Christian subjects, he betrays his own office and his forebears, stretching back over 1,500 years. He betrays them and the civilization they founded and gave their lives for. A repudiation instantly that only became possible because of the rejection of Catholicism by Henry VIII in 1534, when he made himself the anti-pope, and by Parliament in 1688, when it outlawed the Catholic monarchy. Both began a process that inexorably led to the position that Charles has initiated today. Once you abandon the church that Jesus founded and repudiate the successors of the apostles, you open the way to exactly the reversal of faith that has been inflicted on us by a relativistic monarch. How has Charles repudiated his own royal inheritance? I think one of the most powerful articulations I've heard of this came from St. Edmund Campion, a Jesuit priest whom the Protestant state tortured and executed when he challenged its repudiation of the Catholic faith. At his trial, St. Edmund Campion warned his judges that in condemning him, they were condemning, quote, all your own ancestors, all the ancient priests, bishops and kings, all that was once the glory of England. 1,000 years of faith. He knew the Catholic faith was not a foreign import, but the faith that had shaped England for 1,000 years. Her saints, her monasteries, her learning, her laws, her coronation oath, and above all, the holy sacrifice of the Mass. We owe that inheritance a debt of gratitude. We owe it our allegiance. We owe it to the saints who built this country, to the martyrs who died rather than betray Christ, to the Mass that nourished them, and to those monarchs who understood their authority was held under Christ rather than above him. Each generation has its own emperor. Each generation provides its own incense. Each generation must decide where its ultimate allegiance lies. If the king has repudiated Christ and his own forebears, he runs the risk of our repudiating him. If he makes us choose between him and Christ, like Polycarp and St. Edmund Campion, and numberless others, we must and will choose Christ.
Damn right. Thank you. Well, did you say what evidence? Well, you did keep saying no evidence, but there actually is evidence there. So it's pretty bad, that, isn't it? AI.
I was going to do this tomorrow. But unfortunately, I just don't think it can wait. See, my brothers and sisters, there are moments in the life of a kingdom when loyalty
He's not
demands
loyal to
not
Tom
silence,
Town. Yeah.
but truth. And so, today I do not speak against the crown, but try to speak for the crown. I'm not against our sovereign, but for the sacred office entrusted to him by Almighty God. His Majesty has spoken through Buckingham Palace of defending a multi-faith Britain. And yet I ask, with all reverence and with all sincerity, what then has become of the oath he swore at his coronation? What has become of that ancient and solemn covenant by which every sovereign of these realms is charged to maintain the Protestant Reformed religion established by law and to defend not merely faith in general, but to defend the Christian faith that shaped this nation? For centuries, these islands have not been held together merely by parliament, by commerce, or by the sword. These lands, these islands, they have been held together because Christ stood at the very heart of our national life. The cross stood higher than the crown, and the crown willingly bowed before the cross.
Yeah, and we bowed before the fucking crown, before the king.
That was
vowed to
never a
protect the
small
land.
distinction.
It
was the foundation of our laws. It was
and
the
Christian
source
faith.
of our
Anybody
liberties.
that has been christened to
It
be
was
a Christian,
the conscience of our civilization. In my open letter to His Majesty, I asked
I've not been
questions
christened.
that remain
my granddad was
unanswered.
here, I'd be a Christian.
If
Go
Britain,
off my granddad.
if Britain is now to be understood simply as a multi-faith nation, and let me ask,
And that's because he's the
what
person
becomes
that
of the
loves
Christian
more than
settlement
anybody else.
upon which our Constitution rests? If every faith
More than
is
my mum and dad.
to be affirmed
Granddad, more than
equally
my mum and dad.
by the institution
My
established to
granddad.
defend the Christian faith, then what remains of the office of
Not that
Supreme
old
Governor
mum and dad or whatever,
of the Church of England? Really? If every path is to be honoured alike by the crown, then what becomes of the unique claims of Christ before whom kings themselves must one day stand? These are not questions of party politics. They are questions of constitutional duty. They are questions of eternal consequence. The Christian faith has never taught that persecution of those who believe differently should be committed. But our Lord commands us to love our neighbor, to deal justly with all, and to protect the freedom and dignity of every person. Every citizen, whatever his religion, deserves equal justice beneath the law. On that I agree. But let me say this clearly. Tolerance is not theological surrender. To respect every person is not to declare every creed equally true. The first duty of the church is not to mirror the culture, but to boldly proclaim Christ. The first duty of a Christian sovereign is not to baptize the spirit of the age, but to remain faithful to the covenant entrusted to him. So, Your Majesty, should these words ever reach your ears, know this, from my heart, They are not spoken by an enemy. They are spoken by a bishop who prays for you. And I pray for you daily, who honors your office sincerely, and who longs to see you remembered as the king who actually restored confidence in Britain's Christian inheritance, rather than be the king beneath whom it quietly faded. And so I say this to you, my brothers, my sisters, not in anger, but with the solemn burden of one who must answer to a far higher throne than any upon this earth. A crown may command obedience, but only truth commands the conscience. Your Majesty, history is watching. Your people are watching. Heaven itself is watching. There comes a moment in every ruler's life when he must decide whether he shall be carried by the spirit of this age or stand upon the eternal rock. And that hour cannot be postponed forever. Sir, my brothers, my sisters, that hour has come. No monarch is anointed merely to preserve tranquility. He is anointed to uphold righteousness. No sovereign can faithfully serve every altar and remain true to the altar before which he himself was crowned. The crown of these kingdoms has survived invasions, civil war, rebellion, plague, revolution, and all manner of terrors. God forbid that it should become the instrument by which Britain's Christian inheritance is surrendered, not by force of arms, but by uncertainty, not by conquest, but simply by forgetting who we are. England was never made great because she apologized for Christ. Britain was never forged by uncertainty. Our liberties were not won by men who believed every truth was equal. They were won by men who feared God far more than they feared the judgment of their own generation. So, my brothers, my sisters, let the church be the church again. Let the crown actually remember its covenant again. Let this nation bend its knee to Christ again. And if our words are dismissed, then we will speak them again and again and again. If they are ignored, then we will proclaim them again and again and again. If they are ridiculed, then we shall preach them still. You see, my brothers, my sisters, truth does not retreat because power looks away. Christ still reigns. His gospel remains unchanged. His judgment is absolute and certain. And every throne on earth shall one day bow before the throne of heaven. Of that I can assure you. So let us pray, God, save the King. But above all, may the King himself bow joyfully before the King of Kings, while mercy is still offered, while grace is still extended, and while this nation still has time to remember the God who has been its strength, its shield, and its glory. For there is one crown that shall never perish, one kingdom that shall never fall, and one king before whom every monarch shall one day stand. Jesus Christ is the risen Lord. May God have mercy upon us all.
Hello and welcome back to the Restore Britain podcast. I'm Charlie Downs, I'm your host, and I'm joined today by Rupert Lowe, our leader, and
Sorry. Well, here we are.
Needs another party, doesn't it? We don't have enough. We're talking about the right needing another party.
Here we
see
are.
what
Now
we're going
it's
to do
bloody
here.
Phillips now
We're
going on
going to
about the
bring in
stop
the
button.
chairman of Great British PAC. Once the leader of the
I've told you
UK,
to
which is
apologise
no
to Rupert,
Mr.
won't we?
Ben Habib. Good morning, Ben.
Don't care. Apologise.
Good morning.
Oh, there was a sort of delay
I
there.
don't
There was
talk
a
to her,
suspense whether
mate.
we were going to get your
Just won't
lot and who would
apologise.
pop up on the screen and
I
where
like
from.
top she's got on, but I don't talk to
Let
her.
us talk a couple of things today. Because this is a
Bit
good one for
snarky,
you.
isn't
Can
I
I
think.
just say, I agree with the duvet comment. I agree with duvets. I want a duvet in summer, yeah.
You have a duvet in the summer.
I don't.
What's wrong with you people?
Yeah, I do.
You don't know what's good for you. But you like heat, don't you?
Well, it's the comfort, it's the weight.
No, I
It's
don't
the
have a
weight
do
of
if I have a
something on your
machine.
body,
That's it.
you know.
Although I did get a bit cold last night, but I'll have my blankets and everything. It's a little bit chilly.
I couldn't say this.
And a
Can I
sheet.
just say? I get into some trouble if I said I
And
could
my
feel the weight
blanket
of
and my
something
sheet
on
and
top
it's
of me.
warm. It's too warm.
Anyway, before you make me blush, let us talk about this story. There's a growing group of Conservatives who really believe that a strategic
When
pact
it's
is
really hot,
needed
just having a
between
black sheet.
Reform UK and the Conservatives in order to prevent another Labour victory. Apparently there's a growing chorus of Conservative politicians hoping to unite the right, an electoral strategy in which Reform or Conservatives would stand aside in certain seats, a non-aggression pact to avoid splitting the right-wing vote. Now, Ben and I were talking about these sorts of things the other day, weren't we, Ben? What do you make of what's going on with the political landscape on the right?
Well, I think before we talk
Can I
about
do what?
electoral pact, we've got to have the right
I'm up the
singing
floor
team
there.
saying
You
hymn
look down
sheets.
here.
I don't think the right has
In a
really
minute.
established what it understands to be right wing. We've got lots of different people espousing different things, and there's got to be a coming together of political philosophy before you can start talking about giving up this seat for that seat. I know we talk also about broad churches. Broad churches is another way of actually saying that we don't have an established political philosophy on the right, that we're grappling around really trying to get enough support from various factions in the country to create a government. And it's that sort of approach in the past that has so damaged the country. We need a very robust, principled approach to governing this country, which is unashamed in its preparedness to be radical and undo the policies that we've been, governed by for the last 30 years.
The thing is though, Ben,
yeah.
I mean, we're talking about there being a broad church. As far as I can tell, right, and this is a comment I was making the other day, back when you had UKIP 1.0 under the leadership of Nigel Farage, we're talking about a decade, just over a decade ago, you could tell the difference between UKIP, Nigel Farage, and Conservatives and David Cameron. What you couldn't tell
The Royal family really don't want people to read your book. Would you explain why?
There's a whole lot the royal family do, which is under the radar. It's outrageous. I'm talking about the Monet paintings, the Fabergé eggs, the £100 million stamp collection, the string of racehorses, the Duchy of Lancaster, which Charles was in charge of, is charging the NHS. They also claim money for the air. They are greedy beyond belief.
Let's talk about Andrew. What's been going on with his dealings?
Andrew was her favourite son, and he could do no wrong. Charles has protected him as well. No, what they did was what they always do. They cover the whole thing up.
How do the Royal family stop people like you from investigating them?
What they do is they...
Hello, welcome to the Daily Espresso. I'm JJ Nishiobi, and today I'm joined by Mr. Norman Baker, royal writer and author of Royal Mint National Debt. Welcome to the show, sir.
Thank you.
Listen, I would say what you've written about is what I would call royal family corruption. And I'd say the royal family really don't want people to read your book. Would you explain why?
Well, they don't want me to read the previous book, which was called And What Do You Do? What the royal family don't want you to know. Because the royal family carefully cultivates a public image of serving society, of nice pictures of the kids on their birthdays, that sort of thing. It's media manipulation. And there's a whole lot the royal family do, which is under the radar, which is far less flattering about their activities. And particularly when it comes to money, they cost the country an absolute fortune, far more than any other European monarchy, at least 10 times the cost of the next nearest European monarchy, which is the Dutch. They cost us 500 million a year, roughly, is my estimate. And that's a huge amount of money for quite a small family.
Yeah.
And if you dig into that, you realise that this is based on generosity beyond belief in the public purse. It's based on tax exemptions. It's based on income from the two duchies, which really ought to belong to the public and which were regarded in Victorian times as government departments. Plus security for a whole lot of minor earls no one's ever heard of, which they treat as a kind of status symbol rather than anything necessary. So, you've got to ask, why is the royal family so expensive? And that's what my book is about.
Okay. Well, just how deep does this financial cover-up go?
Well, I mean, if you look back at the amount of money they get directly from the sovereign grant, which is what the palace always talks about. It costs a cup of coffee or something, is how you describe it. A very expensive cup of coffee. The last year, the civil list, which was in 2011, was 7.9 million. The sovereign grant this year, which has replaced it, gives the laws 137.1 million. Now, I don't think anyone else has seen that level of inflation in their pay packet over that period of time. And the change from the civil list, which had existed from 1760 to 2011, and was not perfect, but it was related at least to what they were doing, was replaced at the behest of Charles and others, who hankered after the system before 1760. I have to go back in history for your viewers. Before 1760, the system was that the king of the day paid for the army, the navy, the civil service, all the events which had to be paid for at the time, and in return got a small civil list and got money directly from what were crown properties. And in 1760, the system was changed, so the crown properties, the crown lands, as they were called, were transferred to Parliament. It became effectively a public body. The Crown Estate, not a royal body, it's a public body. And in return, the Parliament decided that they should take over responsibility for funding things like the Army and the Navy, which is quite sensible. And the King also got a civil list to help him with his expenditure on behalf of the country. That was a system which existed for 251 years. And although it was, in my view, overfunded, nevertheless the system in a concept was right. Charles, however, when he was Prince of Wales, hankered after these royal lands which he'd lost in 1760 and wanted to reconnect the royal lands with what the royal family was getting. He didn't, interestingly, want to pick up the bill for the army and the navy and the civil service. He was just in a one-way street in terms of reverting 1760. And George Osborne, who was a chancellor in 2011, very foolishly went along with this and linked the money the royals got directly with the profits of the Crown Estate, the public body that's a Crown Estate. It didn't go directly from the Crown Estate to the royal family. They went to the Treasury, as they always have done, but then an allowance was made to the royal family based on the profits of the Crown Estate. This is completely ludicrous because the Crown Estate's a property body and there's no relation to what the royal family does. And in fact, you may as well link what the royal family got to the profits of Tesco, which is irrelevant as that. And that was said by, not a Tesco point, but the other point, in rather more careful terms, by one of the permanent secretaries in the civil service. I mean, this is a nonsensical arrangement. And what's happened since 2011 is, being a property company, they produced profits above inflation every year, which Charles would have known about when he made that pitch for that connection. And of course, there's been massive windfalls from wind farms because the Crown Estate owns the seabed, and we've seen an explosion of wind farms off the coast. Britain's now seen more wind farms offshore than anywhere else in the world. I support that, actually, for renewable purposes. But why should the royal family get a cut of that? Why should hundreds of millions that would have gone to help schools and hospitals and our armed forces, why should that be put directly in the pockets of the king? It's outrageous. It is. And that's only one bit of the money. That's 137.1. I've said 500 million is what the cost is. You then add on 200 million for security, which doesn't need to be there for most of them. Of course, we want to protect the king and William, but we don't need to protect members of the royal family no one's ever heard of. And you're 85 years old living in some cottage somewhere. Why are we supporting them from public funds? No one's threatening them. And if you speak to people who worked in royal protection, then they'll tell you that. Also, the royal family's got so many houses. William's got 7 houses. Charles has got, I think, even more. Well, they all have to be protected. We should really be having one house in central London for key members of the royal family and one house outside if they want to be outside somewhere. And that's it. You know, why are we protecting all these houses from public money? So that's not a waste of money. Then you look at the
Why don't you give them to the illegal
tax
immigrants,
exemptions which exist, which no one else gets.
or give them
Tax
to the
exemptions.
public?
Yeah.
This
Or-
is medieval. And you
Yeah.
haven't moved on from medieval times. There's no inheritance tax paid by Charles on the, or what he inherited from his mother. Now, I'm not talking about Buckingham
Yeah.
Palace and the crown jewels and all that. They are state assets. I'm talking about the Monet paintings, the Fabergé eggs, the £100 million stamp collection,
Yeah.
the string of racehorses, the £500 million of jewellery which Charles inherited from his mother. Why is no inheritance tax paid on that?
Yeah.
Because
Why
everyone
is he
pays
not paying
inheritance tax.
anything? Why is
isn't
he?
Yeah.
Why is he not
So
doing
there's
anything?
exemption from taxation,
It's
and
not
let's remember that
exempted
the
at all.
Queen paid no
The
tax
King
at
is
all
not exempted
on
for
her
anything.
income between
Nobody's
1952 and
exempt
1953.
from the law
No
of the land
capital
and the
gains tax,
land of
nothing
the
at
law.
all.
No
And
one in
you
the
should pay
world.
poll tax.
Doesn't matter who
back
you
in
are.
those days.
King,
So there's a
queen.
huge amount of tax
You're
not
not-
collected,
No,
which
you
has
should not
enabled
be
Charles to
exempt
become
from
very, very
anything.
rich.
Nobody should be.
And then you look at the
ever.
duchies, perhaps
Don't
we'll go to
matter
duchies
if
in a
you're the Prime
minute.
Minister,
I'll
the
let you
King,
get your question in.
if you're Muslim, Christian. It doesn't matter who you are. You should
Well,
not be
the
exempt from
duchies,
any of it.
there's two duchies, Duchy of Lancaster and Duchy of Cornwall. The
The
Duchy of
land of
Lancaster,
the
these
law
are
and the
all
law of
slush
the land.
funds,
No
that's
one's
what they are.
exempted above that.
They should have been wrapped up
Yeah.
in the lands which were transferred to the Parliament in 1760, but they were basically worthless at the time, so they were overlooked.
Yeah.
I mean, the Duchy of Lancaster, I think, produced a profit of, I think, £16 in 1760. They're not bothering about. Well,
Profit
since
of
then, of course,
16
they've
quid.
become hugely valuable in property terms. They now produce a return of profit for Charles from the Duchy of Lancaster, 27 million a year last year, and William gets 22 million from the Duchy of Cornwall. Well, these were regulated by Parliament. They were regulated by an Act of Parliament in the 1830s. They have to report what they're doing to the Treasury. They're exempt from capital gains tax, they're exempt from corporation tax, and yet Charles says they're private estates. Well, it's a pretty curious private estate. It's regulated by legislation, and which is called a government department in Victorian times.
Yeah.
They're not private estates at all. You know, they should be producing profit for the taxpayer, not for the royal family, and fund payments. But they are. So there's another 50 million there handed over to Charles and William for what? And these duchies are run on hugely exploitative grounds. The Duchy of Lancaster, which Charles is in charge of, is charging the NHS £829,000 a year to park ambulances in a derelict warehouse not far from here in Canary Wharf, just over in near London Bridge somewhere. That's a huge amount of money. They're charging even for the Royal Navy to refuel somewhere in Devon. The taxpayers paid for the jetty. The Royal Navy brings its ships in, silos up the jetty, and the Duchy of Lancaster, Duchy of Cornwall, I think in this case, has got a deal now where they're collecting in total 1.2 million just for the Royal Navy to park its ships. I mean, this is outrageous behaviour.
How do they get away with this?
Well, they get away with it because they say Duchy land, or the Duchy owns something else. They own the pier, or they own the water, or something else, and they just say we want to rent for it. You know, when you look at the extent, some of these sums aren't large, but they show the greed, the absolute greed of the royal family. When the extension was, I can come back to London, the Northern Line was extended, if you remember, to Battersea, and as part of that small extension, it went under a slither of Duchy of Cornwall land near Kennington. Well, because it went under their land, they demanded a payment from Transport for London for access to this underland bit of piping they put in, or whatever it was, or tubing, I suppose, for the underground. And you know, nobody else, no other landowner between Kennington and Battersea claimed anything, but they did. They claimed £5,000 odd for access to this slither of land underneath. They also claimed money for the air, because they have to claim money for everything. There was a situation, I think it's in Devon, Devon, Duchy of Cornwall, where there was a bridge built from one side of the river to the other, and they say they own the river. And therefore, when the bridge went in, they said, well, we own the air above the river, so we'll claim for that as well, so to pay for that. I mean, they are completely mercenary when it comes to collecting money from the public purse, from anybody they can get their hands on.
Yeah.
You know, they are greedy beyond belief, and this will be their downfall.
Well, this level of greed that we're seeing, this has been going on for a
Decades.
couple of generations. So this started with Well, Charles certainly learned this from the Queen.
Yeah.
Yes.
And then William presumably is going to continue this, as will his children after.
It's got worse. It's got worse. I mean, what's happened is they've got it to a fine art in terms of collecting money. But it's always been there. There's been a sense of entitlement and arrogance from the royal family for centuries. You know, Queen Elizabeth used to turn up with an entourage, a retinue, without warning at someone's castle and expect to be fed for as long as she wanted to stay, and expected gifts to be given to her in recognition of her status. You know, and then they would leave in 3 months, and the poor bloke who owned the castle was bankrupt. And, you know, that's what happened in the past. You know, if you look at the appalling situation with people who died intestate in the Duchy of Cornwall, Duchy of Lancaster, when they die without a will, the money goes to Duchy of Cornwall or Duchy of Lancaster. It doesn't go to the public purse.
No,
it goes to the Duchy. And Edward VIII, when he was on the throne, briefly, looked at this and saw that
that's what
£1 million
my
was
family
accumulated in a kind of
I thought it wasn't
safe
anybody
fund
had to
in
claim
case
it,
there
but
was any claim against it or whatever. He just
Thanks.
pocketed virtually the whole lot
Yeah.
himself, just hacked himself to £1 million.
Well,
A lot
that's
of
what
money in
we're doing, so
1936.
you can't claim
And he took a lot of money from
land
it.
from your
And you
family.
know, you just think about this, the Second World War,
Yeah, Second
people
World War.
from the Duchy of Lancaster were out fighting for this country.
Yeah, while
often
fucking royal
losing
family
their
were
lives.
taking everything.
And when they lost their life, and when they died intestate, their estate, such as it was, went to King George VI. He benefited from our soldiers dying in the Second World War. I mean, it really is quite shocking.
Yeah, it is. Right, a quick pause in the podcast to tell you about our sponsor, Incogni. You have those phone calls from numbers you don't recognise, or you go in your inbox
Meta
with
AI.
emails and stuff you did not
Didn't
sign up for.
recognise who that was
That's
either,
because
but
someone
yeah,
somewhere
that's a
is
scam as
sending
well, isn't it?
your private information. That's where today's sponsor comes
Well,
in.
they've got my private
Incogni.
information,
They
they've
will
got to put it
contact
on my
these
phone,
these
on
people
my
who have been
WhatsApp.
taking your information, and they'll
Yeah,
say,
so what's
"Oi,
up my
stop,
information, the government."
delete it. Go to the website, incogni.com, you type in the details, 2 minutes later, Incogni is sorting it out for you automatically. And because I love you, I've got you a discount. It ain't
You're
2%,
lovely.
it ain't 20, 60% off.
Oh, I won't be doing that
60%
anyway, 'cause
off
I already
an
have my
annual
information.
Incogni
I
plan.
don't care, that's
Just
what
go
I
to
do.
incogni.com/Daily
To be
Expresso,
on with
or
her,
click the link
if
in
they
the
could
episode
fraud me,
description box
good
below.
luck to them.
Let's talk about Andrew.
Because
What's
I ain't
been
got
going on with
anything to
his-
fucking fraud,
with his
that's
dealings?
what's
And is King Charles essentially protecting his brother's wallet?
protecting
Well,
his
not
brother's
protecting his wallet, but I mean, what
Protecting
Charles has
him
done
and
has
everything
been
else
to,
because he's
and what
involved
the Queen
with
did
that.
before. Well, actually, the Queen was worse because Andrew was her
He was
favourite
worse
son,
than just a
and he could do no wrong.
yeah.
And I'm afraid that was not good for Andrew. It encouraged him to behave badly because he wasn't subject to parliamentary control. He was allowed to do what he wanted on a freelance basis when he was a trade envoy, which was basically to raise money for himself and enjoy himself and
Enjoy himself
take
and
private
make
jets
fun
at public
of it.
expensive golf courses. That's what he did with
And
his
the
time.
Queen's women,
And the Queen could see no wrong.
prostitutes,
And
whatever.
despite the fact that our ambassadors around the world were writing into the Foreign Office and saying this guy's a disaster.
And all of that.
We're actually not doing useful, he's actually
Which I don't
antagonising
mind if
people.
they're
Yeah.
having a
It's so
normal life,
boorish.
but I mean,
Yeah.
it's
And the
not-
way he behaved.
yeah.
You know, you'd see, there was one occasion you met, I think, an Italian
They're
designer,
abusing people.
very important Italian
And then
designer,
they're
that we
abusing
were looking
people's
to get
money.
a trade deal
It's
with,
not
or
for
you'd
public.
get some stuff over here
And the
in
Bible
the UK.
and everything.
And he was introduced to this designer, and who said to him who they were.
Go
And he
for
said,
themselves.
never heard of you, and walked away. I mean, you know, talk about diplomacy. You know, that's how he was.
Yeah.
So the Queen protected him. Charles has protected him as well, less so. I mean, he's now been
And I just heard
excommunicated
they do come
from
through.
the royal family. But it's all been
But
too little too
I'm not
late.
sure.
Yeah.
And people are rightly asking questions of Charles. Well, what
Definitely
did you
Charles
know?
needs to
And when
go.
did you know it?
Yeah.
About
Yeah.
Epstein.
Yeah,
and
when
all
did
the
he know?
connections. Because Epstein and
When did
Ghislaine
King
Maxwell
Charles
were
know
up
about
at
Epstein?
Sandringham.
Yeah, a long
And
time ago
Balmoral,
he did.
both of them, I think.
He was the same as
They
he
had
had Jimmy Savile
details of all the
invested
phone
in.
numbers for Andrew and other
I'm the
members of the
fucking
royal family.
Queen
They were
Gang
entertained in
scandal. I knew
Buckingham
about
Palace.
that.
You know, don't tell me Charles never noticed this.
Yeah.
Don't tell me
You know,
Charles
he
didn't
also
know the
noticed
Queen
it.
Gang scandal or
And
anything
when the
else.
photograph came out of Andrew and Epstein in Central Park
Jimmy
in New
Savile and
York,
Epstein.
did anyone in the royal family say, hang on a minute, what are you doing with this bloke who's been convicted of
Yeah.
all these
And
offences
everything
just been
else.
released?
Yeah.
Why are you associating with it? Did no one ask that question? When the photograph came out of him, Andrew with his arm round Virginia Giuffre, did no one say, what are you doing with your arm round this girl?
Yeah.
Girl. You know, what are you doing with her? Because, you know, she's making allegations about everything. Did no one ask any questions? No, what they did was what they always do. They cover the whole
Cover
thing
it
up,
all
they
up,
smudge it
like
all
with the
over,
fucking,
and hope it'll go away. You know, whenever you see a cracked wall.
Can you tell?
What they do is paint over
Yeah,
it,
they'll
replace the
paint
wall, they
over
paint
it.
over it,
Print it
and hope
over
no
it.
one notices. And that's what they've
No one
done.
notices.
So Charles coming out and saying this is dreadful about
Well, we
Epstein
have noticed
and,
it.
and Camilla ditto. I'm glad they've
He's
said
a
it, but
little
they're 15 years
bastard,
too
he's a devil,
late.
he's faulty.
Absolutely.
And they're always
Exactly
behind
what
public
I've
opinion
noticed.
on this.
I'll
So
tell you what
now
I've
Andrew has
noticed
been
about King
excommunicated
Charles,
up
is that he's
to
the devil.
up
He's
to somewhere
public
in Sandringham, some place where he's not,
Yeah.
he can't be noticed too
He's
much.
the devil.
Charles is picking up the bill for that.
Good.
Question,
Well,
I don't know the answer.
What about,
Question,
no, he's not picking
is
up
he
the bill,
charging
yeah.
that as a business expense against the Duchy of Lancaster? And I think he probably will.
Yeah.
Yeah,
If he's
the
not doing that,
taxpayers are paying
and he's
him.
listening to this, you come clean and tell us whether you are or not. Because
Because
Yeah.
I think that's what's happening.
Mm-hmm.
Therefore, it's an indirect subsidy from the taxpayer for Andrew's accommodation.
No,
And obviously, he's hoping it's
we
all
need
going
to
to
stop
go away.
funding them.
But it's not going to go away because we're getting more and more coming out from the States. And by the way, it's not connected to this country because we can come on to freedom of information accountability, if you like, in a minute. But what we've learned about Andrew, the most damaging things have been coming out from the States, not from here.
Yeah. Well,
This is
how
a-
do the royal family
Why?
stop people like you from investigating them and
they will
exposing
stop people.
them?
Well, they don't stop me, but they try to.
Yeah,
They
they
try
try
to by
to, like
they don't
Metro
try
Air.
to stop me personally, but what they
Well,
do is
personally
they
won't stop
they've
you,
created a
okay.
culture whereby it's difficult to find anything else. What do
Yeah,
they do?
they
First
find-
of all,
yeah, to find
I
anything
was
out,
given an
yeah.
assurance by Rosie Winterton, the relevant minister in 2001, I think it was, or 2000, when I was an MP, that the royal family would be treated no different to any other part of the public sector in terms of freedom of information.
Yeah.
Obviously, there are protections for everybody in that situation because people are entitled to privacy.
They understand that part.
When it
but
comes
they
to
should
spending
be the
public
right
money and
family.
being public accountable,
They should
I was
be
told to be the
public,
same.
for the public.
And I was also told by Rosie Winterton
That's what the royal
that
family for.
the fact that they
the
might be
public.
embarrassed by what came out would not be a reason not to release information.
They're meant to
So I was
do-
very happy with that
like the
response from
magic,
her.
you know,
But it's all been rather
the
unwound.
princesses,
And while the
queens,
Freedom of Information Act has
the
been
king is,
widened in
is
some
meant to
respects
be
since then,
kind of
Network Road, for
magical
example,
and
that passed
everything.
recently,
I'm
and they are.
serious.
Yeah.
The royal family's gone backwards.
I was going to
What
say,
happened?
it's meant to
There
be a
were
bit
some
of everything,
embarrassing
and we are meant
revelations,
to know what,
especially
you know, we are meant to see
Charles'
what
spider
the
letters,
books
remember
and
those?
things.
These are letters he wrote to
And it's not
ministers,
silly at all.
quite inappropriately lobbying
It's-
for policy changes, which is not what he should be doing in Prince of
I
Wales
was going to
21.
say, them
He's supposed to be
the
non-political,
public people,
arguing in
they're
favour of
normal,
hunting,
the
arguing in
same
favour of
as
pulling out
anybody
the
else.
thing. Doesn't matter what you think about those
I'm
issues,
saying.
but it's
They are
not his
the
role to lobby on
But
that.
they kind of are.
And it's certainly not his role
Like
to lobby
rest of
privately
them.
on it. And of
But
course, the
every human
Guardian
being-
finally took court
And
action,
the
and
maybe
despite
it's the crunch, you're not
a huge
perfect,
rearguard
like
action from the
myself
government
at
today,
sometimes.
quite disgracefully actually, being a Labour government, should have
Or
known
whatever.
better. Finally, the letters were
No,
released,
they're
and we
not
learned
nice.
what he was doing. Now, what did Charles do then?
King Charles
He
ain't
didn't
nice,
say,
is he? I love him.
"Oh, I'm
He said,
terribly sorry, I shouldn't have done so, I recognise I overstepped a mark." No, he said, "Can we change the act so I'm excused in the future, basically so I can carry on lobbying without anyone finding out?"
Yeah.
And the
What
Freedom of
they
Information Act was
find out,
changed
suitcases
in
of
about
money.
2010 to exempt him and William
Exempt him
completely from any queries.
Oh,
So that
queries about
even
that,
if the
about
public
money
interest,
again,
there's no public interest test now for the Freedom of
No,
Information
well,
Act
they
when it comes
shouldn't
to
be allowed
Charles
to be
and William.
doing that.
And that's where matters rest
No,
on
it's
that.
not.
Why?
Sensation, no.
Why are
Why
the governments doing this?
Why indeed? I don't know the answer to that, but obviously they shouldn't be.
Yeah.
But that perhaps becomes the
It should not
second
be allowed.
element of why they get away with things, is
You
deference.
cannot get away with
There's a
anything.
culture of
Not get away
deference
with things
still.
in the world.
It's losing its effect actually, but there's
No.
still a culture of deference to the royal
But
family.
still won't let
And they
them get
rely
away
on
with it,
that.
that's the point.
They rely on
The
that to get
spirits
away
won't
with
allow them
things.
to get away with
You know,
it.
if you go back to
Sorry, we'll
1952,
catch up.
when Queen Elizabeth was
Yeah,
had her coronation,
1982.
you know,
Was that 82 they said that?
25% of the population
Well, I fucking do, because I think I was just born in that era.
is deference.
Mm-hmm.
There's a culture of deference still. It's losing its effect actually, but there's still a culture of deference to the royal family, and they rely on that. They rely on that to get away with things. You know, if you go back to 1952,
Oh, 1950.
when Queen Elizabeth was at her coronation,
Ah, yeah.
you know, the 25% of the population in an opinion poll then thought she would put there by God directly.
Wow,
That's a difference. Members of the army who were attending were told they couldn't have sexual intercourse for 48 hours before the ceremony. Now, how they checked up on that, I've really no idea. But that's what they were told. And then you also had a situation there where the only girls, and there were girls, who could hold the Queen's train behind her had to be virgin daughters of members of the nobility.
Wow.
I mean, this is all absurd. And the Queen was not even allowed to meet anyone who was divorced. Well, good thing that changed, given what happened to Andrew and Charles
yeah.
later on. So, I mean, that culture of deference, and there was a newspaper, I think in the 1960s, a newspaper reporter mentioned as part of the royal tour overseas that the Queen had taken her shoes off to relax. Well, he got bollocked for that because how dare you insult the Queen? And there's just nothing there. He got severely reprimanded. There was a huge debate between the Daily Telegraph and the royal household in the 1960s because the royal household would only call was it Princess Anne would only call her. Princess Anne, rather the Princess Anne. There was I can't remember Princess Anne, but there was a the missing.
Yeah.
And there was a huge row about the absence of the different article. I mean, this is all absurd. So the deference runs through. It runs through Parliament because MPs can't ask questions.
Yeah.
They have to be deferential. When we arrive in Parliament, you have to give an oath of allegiance to the monarch, his heirs and successors, which by the way includes Prince Andrew, ex-Prince Andrew, still in line of succession, and Harry and everybody else. That's your oath of allegiance you have to take. If you don't take it, you can't take your seat. So you could be elected. Let's say a party, let's say the Labour Party, for example, stands on a platform abolishing the monarchy. They could get a majority in Parliament, let's say. None of them can take their seats to abolish the monarchy until they've all taken an oath of allegiance to the monarch. That's what we have in this country. That's a deference which is still shown. And you look at TV interviews, politicians go on there quite rightly and they're grilled by people as to what what they're doing. I've seen the interview with Keir Starmer who's taken over the ropes,
Yeah.
But so he should be Prime Minister, and that's part of the job. And he's not complaining, and neither should he complain. But when the members of the royal family are interviewed, if they are interviewed, they want all the questions in advance.
Yeah.
They'll only be interviewed, they see all the questions in advance, and they can know the council are not answering that question, take that one out.
Like Hollywood divas.
Yeah, and they don't, and what the broadcasters don't do is say, we're not interviewing on that basis. Nor do they say, we're asking questions which have been agreed in advance with the panelists, and that's the only way we can interview this person. They don't do that. They pretend it's a proper interview. So the public at large don't know this is happening the way it does. And then the third element of that, which is apart from deference and the freedom of information exemptions and so on. And the fourth element, because another one's MPs can't do anything very much because of Erskine May and the ability to ask royal questions is limited by, and you have to be deferential. That's part of Erskine May. The fourth element is legal action. When there's a threat of anything coming out, which they don't like, they resort to lawyers.
So we could have got
There was
that
a
at
case
least our
where
first plane off the ground to Yolanda.
Charles was out shooting. They love killing animals, of course. They don't like the public to know that, but they love killing animals. He was out shooting in Sandringham, and a member of the public took a photograph of Charles shooting. And Charles immediately phoned up the police and said, I've been photographed by this person, how dare you? And the police came along, and due credit to the police, who aren't always very good with the royal family, but they came along and said, this man's in a public footpath. He's entitled to take a photograph from a public footpath. So, and he was so incensed, this guy, that he went to the Mail, or Mail on Sunday. Next thing that happens is Charles's lawyers contact the Mail on Sunday and say, we don't want this story. And the Mail on Sunday, to their credit, said, well, I'm sorry, we're going to publish it. It's public interest. We're publishing it, and they did. And that's how we know about it. But on how many occasions have royal lawyers contacted a broadcaster or a newspaper and said we don't want it? How many occasions have they been, as a public story was pulled, without knowing about it?
Well, I asked you what the royal family would do to stop people like you from investigating them, and you said nothing to me, but they're doing all this to everyone else. Yeah.
Well, I will be investigating.
Possibly, if you enjoyed this episode, like, share, comment, and importantly, subscribe. So many of you are watching without subscribing. You're missing out on fantastic content. So hit that subscribe button right now. Now, Mr. Baker, my mind is blown with everything that you've been saying so far about the royal family. It seems like it's all a lie. When they talk now about slimming down the royal family, are they actually slimming down the royal family, or is that a lie? Because I didn't know that we're still paying police officers to go and protect octogenarian royals who I've never heard of before.
No, precisely so. But look, are we selling the monarchy? No, in the actual terms. Will there feel people in Buckingham Palace? Yes. will you
Oh,
have
I
fewer
don't
people
mind Edward.
undertaking role
I'm
duties?
not sure
Yes,
about them,
because
things we don't
Harry's
really
gone
hear
away,
about
and Meghan's
them,
gone
so-
away, and Andrew's
And
persona non
Prince
grata.
Anne,
So by
she's
definition,
alright,
they're reducing
I
the
mean,
numbers.
she's not the best.
And the Queen and Prince Philip have died.
But out
so
of
they
all
kind
of
if you
them,
like,
Prince
they want
Anne,
to
I'm
discourage
going to say, is
the
not
wastage
bad.
and
She's
reduce the
alright,
numbers.
Prince Anne. I think she,
So the
King
intent
Charles
is
left.
to be another monarchy.
and
And
she,
William, I think,
I was
wants
going to
to
say,
have
because she's by
sensibly,
William,
actually, just
I just
him
hope
and
to
Kate,
God,
his children, and their children. And that's what it should be, as it is
Yeah.
in Scandinavian
Yeah.
monarchies and
yeah,
the Benelux
yeah,
countries.
we don't pay for
So,
the rest of them,
in a sense,
I'll be
that's the
fucking
direction
other
I think he
places,
should
I'm
go, and I think
sorry.
he is going. But
we
here's the
should
key
be paying more
proviso.
for
Are they going to cost
Katie
less?
William, but
No.
I hope to God that
They're
Katie
going to cost
William,
more.
How they cost more for less of them?
They're going to cost more because the grant relationship with the amount of money from the public
well,
person
the,
is not going to go
yeah,
down. It's a
but
temporary
Katie and
blip
William
which is
don't need the
made
public
it
money
larger
now,
for
they've got their
Buckingham Palace,
own
but
money,
they're
and
still
they
going to
should now be
have
living
the
off their own
to
money.
the Crown Estate
I'd
will
be able
give them
to
an
give the
inflation plus
public money
increase.
back to the
And by the way,
purse.
the arrangement they reached with George
Because
Osborne
how
is a sovereign
on
right
earth
can
do they
never go
expect this
down.
country to get
It can only go up or
anywhere?
stay the same.
Now they've got
It's going
one
to have to go to
King
Parliament
Charles
this year because the
they'll
Buckingham
have
Palace
all
will
the
come out. So they're going to have to vote it down this
William
year.
and Kate
But essentially, it's going to go on a
with
ratchet
being the king,
upwards
and I just hope that
indefinitely. So that's going to cost more
William
money.
has not changed
Secondly,
his
the Duchy of
religion,
Cornwall, Duchy of Lancaster,
and
which should
he's
return
going to
to
be
the
swearing
public,
upon
are not
oath
being
to be
returned,
a
and they're
proper
making a
king.
profit beyond
I was
inflation
going to say with
every year,
Kate
so that's going to go up.
So
And then
I
you look at what they're
like
doing in the
Kate,
duchies.
and I like William.
William got some nice PR a couple of weeks ago.
But-
I'm going to get rid of the fifth of the Duchy of Cornwall,
Oh,
Yeah.
and I'm going to invest in nice housing. Well, what's he getting rid of? He's getting rid of farmland that
yeah,
isn't much value,
Mm-hmm.
and he's going to build more industrial
No.
units
I think
and
we
more
should
houses.
stick with
What
the
does that mean?
farmland,
That means
please.
more rental income
No, we
for the
want
duchy,
farmland,
and therefore more
and we
profit
want-
for him.
No,
And if
we
you look
want,
at
we
who
want
William
him
has
to
put on the
turn
board
that
of
to
the
a
Duchy of
public
Cornwall since he took
farmland
over.
for public
Who are these people? Are
people
they
to plant
the
things and
environmentalists?
farm.
Are they people who care about the quality of water?
No,
Are
no,
they
no,
people who
no,
are interested
no,
in
I
making
don't
sure
like
that
the sound
that
of
the
that.
social housing works
No.
well? No,
We've got
the people who are on the
housing.
board are
That's
property
for the
developers
council, that's for the government,
and
not for the
investment
king.
bankers. That's
No,
who's
that's
coming to the
not
board.
just not
That tells you
for
what
the
his priorities are.
Yeah.
No, but
And
his
he
priorities
announced
are wrong then a
this
bit
week
there.
that
His
his
priorities
eldest
is
George is
to
going to
the
go to
land, the
Eton.
country,
Yeah.
the people.
Am I right in thinking
Local
The church.
football guy.
That's what the kings
Am I right in thinking
The
that in
king
Europe,
should be
lots of the
prioritised.
royals send their kids to
basically.
state schools?
Yes, they
The
do,
land,
and they
the
behave
church,
by and large as normal people.
the people.
Yeah.
They go
I was going
shopping
to say,
in the
then the
streets, or
people,
they
the
cycle
public.
to school and things. I mean,
And what I
and
mean by the
they're-
land, I
they're
mean by
they're bedded
that
in the
land that
community,
they have
you know.
got for farming. Give it
and
to
I'll
the
give you a
people
little
for
vignette
farming,
there,
for
which is that,
people that are
I
local
was in
there to farm.
Sweden as a minister, and I forgot what the meeting was at, it was some sort of function.
It wasn't with Prince
To
Andrew, was
create-
it? We've heard about his meetings.
Land where planting, I'm going to
Actually,
say,
he's about the only
you
role
know,
I've ever
this-
met in that
the one
actually.
that's there,
good,
But
create
no, I was
massive
in this
food production
function in Sweden.
food,
I got chatting to this woman in
their own veg,
there,
their own
and farm
food,
attendants into conversation.
there,
Of course, she was a Swedish
plus
princess.
eggs and
and you just
things.
think, can you ever
And all of
imagine that
them
level of
things, and that can be
informality?
delivered round
Yeah,
to
no.
people
That's what happens
like me.
over here, and you see it for decades back.
Fresh fruit and
Is,
veg
you know,
for
it's a royal
people.
present. First of all, you have to turn up
And that's how they
hours
make
in
it
advance
food
of when they
parcels
do,
to
because you can't
people.
possibly turn up after the
That's what I'm
royal.
saying.
Yeah.
That's
Then
the
you're in
point
the
of the
line,
land, the people.
And the royal walks along the line, decides whether they want to speak to you or
Go
not.
to
And
the
you ask
bloody
questions
houses,
like,
great.
now what do you do? Have you come far? These are two questions.
We haven't got
that's
the
about
land
it.
anymore
And
anyway
that's
to
how the
build
engagement
anymore. The
takes
land
place. And
is been
you know,
built.
I went to, it's in my
It's not
previous book,
about,
and what do you do? Quick plug from
whatever,
the previous book
shove
as
a few
well.
houses there, no,
I
that's
went
on
to a
land that
function
shouldn't be built on.
in Burgess Hill in Sussex.
Like the Lake
I was
District,
invited there by the Liv Head leader of the council.
I'm,
They were opening a leisure centre,
No, we don't
and
think
the
it should be
Queen,
built there.
as she
It
then
is-
was, Queen Elizabeth,
that land is
had agreed
sacred
to
to
open
the
a leisure
country, the
centre.
land.
Now, I have to say, it's a bit beneath her to
The
open a leisure
food
centre, but
is-
nevertheless,
that
she had
part
agreed
of
to
the
do
land
that.
is
So
resources.
I turned up there,
Nothing
and
should
we were
be
all there
allowed to be
hours
built
before we
there.
needed to be there. And
And it
there were
used
no
to be very
seats.
hard to build a house there.
And
in the
there were
Lake
kind of
District,
bird tables with
Mhm.
kind of rubbish bits of
I don't
stuff to
even
eat on
think
top of
there's
the
a
bird.
spot
Yeah.
ever Exactly, and the
That's all
little
there was to
villages
it.
in the Lake
And there was a couple of
There's
old
little
women there
churches
who,
and
I don't know who they
stuff.
were, but they were looking very frail. And it was quite hot. They wanted to sit down. And
And
couldn't
that's
sit down.
like in
And
the
one of them
certain
leaned very
land,
heavily
they're
on
not
this
allowed
bird
to even
table.
build the church.
And I said
like
to
that.
one of the flunkies
Or
who was
anything,
there,
because
can we get a seat
it's
for this
basically
woman because she clearly wants us to know.
Mhm.
And he said to me rather
the
grandly,
less people that walk
no
on
one
that
can sit
land,
down in the
the better.
presence of the Queen. He said to me. I said, well, are they allowed to fall down? They're going to fall down.
And
It's
then
absolutely ridiculous,
you could
these
turn
rules.
that land
Yeah.
What
also
century are we
into
in?
also
It seems
a wild.
that
You
our
could
British
turn
royal
that
family
land
have
into a
done
wild park.
the greatest
wild
ever magic trick
farmland
of
for
convincing
children,
a lot of the
people to
public
go to.
that they
As you
are
say, People
not
don't pick
greedy,
raw
that they
fruit, raw
are
veg.
living
Comes
within
to
their
farm,
means,
get
and they're
raw
doing all they can for
eggs,
charity,
have
and
children
even
so
mention
can
again
see
about George going to
animals,
Eton, and I went on social media and
experience
said, why isn't he going to a normal
themselves, the
state school?
people, the
And
public.
people were saying,
Go
how dare you?
there.
Why would the future king go to a
Look, I'm
state
going to say
school?
we're not talking about
You're
colourists,
going
we're
back to
talking
we
about
said
people.
about Queen Elizabeth, how
Yes,
they made people
the
believe that
illegal
she was
immigrant,
there by
King
God.
Charles is not putting his foot
It
down
seems
there,
that some
and he's
people
allowed
still
in the
probably
country
do
and
believe
everything,
that.
yeah.
I think some people probably do believe
And
it, and
religion
you know,
and
the other,
stuff, I
I forgot
believe
to
yes, I know
add
nobody
an
else.
element of
I can't
money
say
they're
Queen
costing us is money
Elizabeth
they're
has.
not paying and they should be paying. And
I'm
let's
hoping
remember
that
that
William
Andrew had
King Charles
rent-free
has
property
changed his
Mhm.
Royal Lodge,
properties, this,
yeah,
that, and the other. No,
down
that shouldn't go out.
there, rent-free from a massive house.
No,
But
no,
not just him.
no.
Prince Edward in
No,
Bagshot Park,
they earn their own money
120
to
room
be able to
mansion,
pay for
thank you
their
very
own
much,
bills and their own things.
peppercorn rent,
Right.
and he was allowed to rent out
No.
the barns, the stables,
no,
for I think
no,
120,
you shouldn't be allowed to do
£130,000
that.
a year
It's
income. So he's
public
quid in.
spaces
Yeah.
where
From,
they're
it
renting
turned
out
out
to
the story in the
private
Times
pubs,
today,
not what should be done.
which is
These-
I'm
them
mentioning on the
places
newspaper on your
should
podcast.
be-
That's fine.
Um,
Them
That's
there
fine. They're not as
should
good as
be
we are anyway,
passive
but that's
for
fine.
people.
which was showed
Making them
that
holidays should be
the
given
deal
to
had
proper
been,
doctors,
and the
the
defence
English
for
white
Edward was
doctors.